The Paleogene period was the first period of the Cenozoic era. It followed the Cretaceous period and preceded the Neogene period. Previously to the naming system used today, the Paleogene period was described as part of the Tertiary period, which included the entire Paleogene period and the first half of the Neogene period. This period lasted from 65 million years ago until 24 million years ago. Scientists have divided the Paleogene period into three epochs: the Paleocene, the Eocene, and the Oligocene. The Paleocene lasted from 65 million years ago until 54 million years ago. The Eocene lasted until 38 million years ago, and the Oligocene for another 14 million years after that. According to fossilsfactsandfinds.com, each epoch has unique characteristics of climate, geography, and life that differ them from one another. At the beginning of the Paleocene epoch, the dinosaurs had just died out. Around 55 million years ago, a temperature spike caused the seas to rise by about 9 degrees Fahrenheit. The global climate was very hot. The majority of the Earth was tropical or subtropical, and this high temperature led to the world being covered in tropical forests and vast oceans. Palm trees even grew as far north as Greenland. Many of the single-celled organisms in the oceans were killed off because of the extreme rise in temperature. On land, however, animals responded quite differently. They radiated and diversified into many new forms. While the Paleogene period continued, the Earth began to cool. As described by National Geographic, by the end of the Oligocene epoch, the Earth had become too cool to sustain the tropical forests, and grasslands and less dense forests began to form across the northern hemisphere. This change made it possible for massive herds of grazing mammals to take over these areas. Beginning around the start of the Paleocene epoch, mammals took over the planet in the absence of the recently deceased dinosaurs. These animals were very small, many of them only the size of rodents. During this time, the first primates, rodents, and the ancestors of hoofed animals came into existence. Throughout the Eocene epoch, bats, elephants, and the first horses entered the world. These horses were called Eohippus and were only a fraction of the size of modern-day horses. During this time, the first whales developed, and grazing mammals filled ecological niches. National Geographic described the formation of whales as the biggest development of the Paleogene period. These whales evolved from land mammals that took to the seas. As the Paleogene period came to a close, it entered into the Oligocene epoch. During this time, the first dogs, cats, pigs, and even tusked whales existed. These were the ancestors of our modern-day species. In the Paleogene period, there were many large flightless birds that are now extinct. New species evolved, and many of the birds alive today are the same as they were during the Paleogene period. Throughout this time, sharks remained the ruler of the seas. Without the massive mosasaurs and plesiosaurs from the Cretaceous period, there were no predators for the sharks, and as many new species of fish formed, sharks grew more and more numerous. Squids became more diverse and plentiful, and new species of sea urchins replaced ones that had been killed off before. Sea snails creeped along the seafloor, searching for microorganisms to eat. Smaller animals survived from the Cretaceous period and thrived in the warm tropical climate of the world. These reptiles included turtles, crocodiles, snakes, and lizards. The Paleogene period was a time of great geological change. At the start of the Paleocene epoch, South America and Africa had just separated, creating the beginning of the Atlantic Ocean. India had still not collided with Asia, and North America was still attached to Europe. Also at this time, Australia was connected to Antarctica. Through the Eocene epoch, the only major change that occurred was the separation of North America and Europe. When the Oligocene period was occurring, the sea levels were low because much of the water had frozen into glaciers in Antarctica and in the north. Australia also separated from Antarctica and began its drift towards its current position. India collided with Asia at this point. This forced the Asian plate to buckle, and the Himalayan mountains were formed. According to PBS.org, fossil records make up the majority of the evidence we have to support our knowledge of the Paleogene period. These fossil records, as well as new understanding of DNA, radioactive decay, genomes, and natural selection, have made these theories of what happened during this period highly supported by scientists. By examining the rocks from that time period, scientists have evidence that show that the climate increased drastically, causing a mass extinction of single-celled organisms. Then the cooling caused grasslands to form. They also have an increasing number of mammal fossils from the beginning of the period to the end. Scientists have three methods to determine the age of these fossils. Evolution.berkeley.edu states that the three methods used by scientists to determine those ages are radiometric dating, stratigraphy, and molecular clocks. Radiometric dating is the process geologists use to estimate how long ago rocks formed, and to infer the ages of fossils contained within those rocks. When molten rocks cool, forming what are called igneous rocks, radioactive atoms are trapped inside. After this happens, these atoms decay from an unstable parent atom into a stable daughter atom. By measuring the number of parent atoms and comparing that to the number of daughter atoms, scientists can discern the amount of time that has passed since the rock formed. While this is useful for figuring out how old an igneous rock is, it does not tell us how old fossils are, because for the most part, fossils are found in sedimentary rocks. To figure out the date of those fossils, scientists find layers of igneous rocks above and below the layer of sedimentary rock that the fossil was found in. This gives us an accurate range of when the fossil was formed. Finding the layer of igneous rock above and below the fossil is called bracketing the fossil. Scientists use stratigraphy to date fossils as well. Stratigraphy is the process of noting which layer of rock, or strata, the fossil was found in, and comparing it to the fossils found in other layers. Certain fossils, referred to as index fossils, are useful in determining those ages. Index fossils were organisms that only lived for a short time. Comparing the layer of strata that the index fossil formed into the one that the new fossil was formed in gives us a relative way of dating how old a fossil and the rock around it is. Molecular clocks are useful for determining at what point one species divided into two. These are called lineage-splitting events. Being only 40 years old, this idea is fairly new. It is based on mutations of DNA over millions of years. Scientists can determine the rate at which mutations occur. As an example, Berkeley gives us two strands of DNA that differ by 4 bases. The mutations of the bases occur every 25 million years. This means that the two strands of DNA are about 100 million years apart from each other. This technique is being used to accurately determine the origin of modern humans, the human-chimpanzee divergence, and the Cambrian explosion. This evidence, as well as some inference, makes up the knowledge we have of the Paleogene period today.